This right on the timing. I think I should just have a countdown, like a timer. Hey, everybody, it's Elysia, the host of the Global Resources for Men. And today I am live with Nathan Lee, hanging out in my hometown of Olympia, Washington. And he is here today to bring forward a very potent conversation that it's important for us to be able to practice vulnerably sharing and creating that safe, respectful space without shame or invalidation. So today Nathan is going to be speaking to us about homophobia and the double-edged sword of people who are homophobic and people who experience the other side of homophobic people, and what that does to mental health and also physical health. And it's great that he's coming forward to us today about this because he has a master's degree in counseling psychology, but also kinesiology and sports psychology. And he started a PhD, but he can tell you a little bit more about that if you want. But it's so cool because Nathan he is gay, and he's also like this great academic, and he's just lived an amazing life, and he partners with horses. There's so many cool different things that he does to be able to inform this conversation on multiple platforms. So Nathan, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and yeah, I'm excited to have these conversations because I earnestly come here to just have a really good conversation for everybody, and I hope that everyone is able to pull something from this conversation that they can find resourceful, no matter what it is. So.
Fantastic. And Nathan also posted an article in the comments below if you'd like to read about it later, if you're catching the replay, if you just want to figure out like a little bit more what this is about. And that's a scientific article, right?
Correct, yes. So it was published in the journal, American Journal of Public Health. So it's an epidemiological study, very, well done, a really good study for sure.
So we're here not just for opinions, folks, but also science.
Yeah. So, I do like my science.
yeah, I know you're big on the science aspect.
Yeah.
So, in regards to this whole experience, Nathan, growing up, you grew up in a very rural environment, didn't you?
Yes. So rural Paradise, Texas. It's about an hour north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and pretty small community, a very, very conservative, very religious community. Also grew up in a very conservative religious family. Ranching family, so I grew up with the horse background, and yeah, it was definitely quite the experience for me. Growing up in a pretty strongly homophobic family, and coming to the understanding kind of early, around 14 years old, that I'm one of those people, and spending the next 15 years, so to speak, going through the mental gymnastics and fortunately becoming an adult and going out into the world and meeting a lot of different people, moved around, lived a lot of different places, and fortunately had a really great, number of really great friends that I met that ended up being really awesome allies and essentially teaching me how to accept myself and love myself for who I am, and being able to make a lot of sense in terms of just making meaning of what it was to grow up in that sort of environment, and being able to use my experience to help others on both sides of the topic. Able to.
How old were you when you first came out to the public?
So I didn't come out with my family for some time. I had a number of good friends that I met while I was off at college, as an undergrad. And but it took me, so I was 14 when I had the realization, and I think I was 15 years later, I was 29 when I actually came out to my family. But I would say publicly, aside, it was probably around 24 years old before I really felt comfortable. I think just being out in terms of just with the general public.
Yeah. What was that like in school, and like feeling like there were women that were coming on to you and like navigating that whole situation? Did you ever try dating women, or what was that like?
So through high school, I was kind of just that dorky kid. So there weren't too many of the girls that were like super interested, but there were definitely a few. And I I think I just managed to kind of skirt the situation. So growing up on a really large ranch, really, you know, a good ways from town, that required just a lot of me being there. I had a lot of chores, a lot of things that I had to do. Um, I wasn't as, you know, freely available as like a lot of others who maybe grew up in town.
Right.
So, you know, fortunately, I didn't have to deal with it too much growing up, but certainly in college, I've had, you know, certainly my fair share of you know, young women who didn't quite catch the drift, you know, and I had to just kind of like break it to them. But yeah, I would say that for the most part, I didn't really have a terrible experience. Definitely had a few, you know, young women who were maybe didn't take it as well as they could and had some, you know, homophobic sort of feedback. But you know, that's on them. That's their thing. And, you know, just sort of fortunately, I've come to a place where, you know, certainly when that happened, it did have a pretty big impact. And I certainly walked away with a good wash of shame and I shouldn't say good, but a significant wash of shame and sort of humiliation, but have later been able to sort of develop the wherewithal just and sort of the emotional resilience within myself just by the work that I've done to you know, really embrace and accept myself for who I am. So now, you know, fast forward to today, those sort of comments would, you know, I wouldn't allow those, I wouldn't hold those for someone.
You wouldn't allow it to like permeate your being, for instance.
Definitely, yeah, because
Like,
you know, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, what about when you were younger, when you were growing up in that rural community? And I feel like in the rural communities that I've been, there's just a natural conversation that happens, and there's a lot of homophobic terms that are just thrown around, regardless of what somebody's sexual orientation is. So, like, knowing that you were like that, you know, what was that like for you in navigating that internally and not feeling like you could have a conversation and, you know, all those different pieces?
Oh, definitely. So I mean, what comes to mind for me, so even at 14, I had the realization, but would still say that I certainly did not accept it, and was still sort of in this mindset that that could be something that I could hide from the world. I could become an adult, get married to, you know, a woman, have, you know, have a wife, have children, you know, do the typical heteronormative sort of lifestyle. So as a child growing up, it probably would have been too much for me as a young boy, young gay boy growing up in a very conservative rural Texas community to I guess daydream too much or think too much about what it would be to be a gay man. I think psychologically I just did what I needed to do just to kind of negotiate the situation by just you know, doing my best to blend in and not raise suspicion. And you know, and until I was able to go out and, you know, develop a good community of people who you know, could have been supportive. Because
Right.
as you know, we know through a lot of research, social support is incredibly important. It has a huge impact on health. And you know, as a young man or a young boy and teenager, those resources just weren't in place. And so I think for me, it just wasn't an option.
Yeah.
And so psychologically, I just couldn't go there. I just kind of had to, you know, just take each day sort of being in the closet and doing my best just to kind of blend in and not bring too much attention to myself.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. I mean, like I'm actually bisexual, and like I had my first spark period like with a person was with a girl, and so it wasn't something like I chose. It was just like what it was, you know. And
Certainly.
then like the default of like being attracted to boys and whatnot, but always like growing up, because I turned 41 yesterday, and growing up in a like relatively small, like Olympia being fairly conservative in the 80s and 90s, and not having that space where I felt like I could have that conversation safely, you know, and feeling like there was always part of myself that I couldn't fully express. I couldn't be all of myself, you know, and having somebody that was super close to me, that I'd broached the subject, like in a general, like, what if blah, 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 you know, and them telling me like, well, you wouldn't, like, I would still love you, but you wouldn't be a whole person.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And like how deeply that was like wounding, and the like the regular remarks that they would make in general because of like how deeply steeped they were because of their generation that they were in, right?
Yes.
And like not wanting to embarrass like the family and the awkwardness. And I was always a very gregarious person, you know, like always just very lovey-dovey and cuddly, and like not wanting to make any of my girlfriends feel uncomfortable, right? Because I was like, didn't know how to navigate that because I didn't have any modeling. And, you know, I didn't have a counselor, a mentor, a life coach to like talk to me about different things. And it's just, and then having relationships, I'm like, man, if I could have just been all of myself, maybe I could have had like a functional relationship with a woman and been happy and bypassed all that traumatic stuff that I experienced.
Yes. Yes.
You know, so there's like all these different pieces, and how do we create safe spaces for people to be able to have vulnerable conversations so that all of us can live authentically, and people that are outside of necessarily the norm, like how do we create spaces where if they're really uncomfortable about something, and honoring where they're at, because that's a piece too, because it's like it's two parties, it can't just be about one or the other, which is why we're here to have this conversation today, to honor both sides in their journey.
Yes, for sure. Because that is incredibly important. You know, there was something else that I was going to mention, but you know, with that last piece, uh, I think what has been one of the biggest pieces for me throughout my years of continuing to come out. You know, you don't come out one time. It's a continuous process that there's always new people. There's always potentially a new job, or
Right.
like for me, I go into a new barn, so I'm meeting a lot of new people, and especially being in a barn, some of these equestrian centers can, it runs the gamut in terms of where they may lie on the socio-political spectrum.
Right.
And so I'm still blending in.
Yeah, because you're already a minority as a man, and then you're even like a smaller minority as a gay man, like working
Yes.
in the mental health profession, working with horses. Like it's just, yeah.
So I kind of lost what I was going to say there too, but
In the barns, you go to the barns, political spectrums.
Just in terms of the other side of it. So like with me, it took me 15 years to come out to my family for a reason. And, that's been a process, even since coming out. It didn't necessarily go, the way that could have, our trajectory in terms of our relationship of allowing that to be safe in our relationships. It didn't start out, so it started out pretty bumpy. And but over time we've definitely made some really good process, and I think a huge piece that allowed that to happen was me realizing that I had those 15 years of sort of doing the mental gymnastics around accepting myself, and then working up the courage and having the self-esteem and the confidence in who I am to come out to them, and have the ability to be resilient enough to get through a lot of disappointment and sort of how that conversation went, knowing preparing that would very well be the case, and yet being able to work through that, and then over time being able to cultivate a lot of great vulnerability, and a lot of great just for lack of a better word, this intimacy in my relationships with my family around this topic that was very difficult, and I had enormous amount of fear around, and they had a lot of fear around, and yet we've made a lot of great progress in terms of just being able to have great conversations, and them coming to me for advice about, okay, so my kids are 4 or 5 years old, how do we talk to them about or how would you recommend that we talk to our kids about what it is for them to have a gay uncle, and what that could mean for them as they get older. So having a really difficult start, but things have come a long way, and I think a large part of it just was me having compassion, recognizing that I'm not the only one that has skin in the game here, that there's a process for my family to come out as a family member of a gay person.
Yeah.
And to do so in sort of a public way.
A public way. I'm like, I just came out on a social platform for the first time ever.
Oh, well, awesome. And And I didn't know that 100%. I know you had mentioned something previously. So kudos to you. I mean, that's a huge step, coming out, on such a platform. I mean, so.
It's only hundreds of people and potentially thousands in the future. It's fine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It'll be really interesting to my family if they watch it later and be like, I didn't know that.
Well, there's many ways to find out, and we're a little ways out from Christmas, which is good because I can tell you that's not the best time.
That's not the best time. You're like, hey, open a present, congratulations.
Okay, no. That was one thing that if I could go back and kind of change how I did that whole thing, I would not do it on Christmas Eve because.
Oh man.
I didn't go home very often.
Did you bring your boyfriend with you? Is that how you did it? You're like, hey, so this is my boyfriend.
They weren't quite ready for that. So I didn't do that. But yeah, if I could go back, I would definitely change a little bit of the timing, but it all worked out. It's what I kind of had to do. I felt like I just needed to get it done and over with, and that's when it happened. So
I get it. I mean, it took you 15 years. I think it took me something like 24 to come out to my, like 24 and 26 years or something like that to come out to my family. So yeah.
Well, and I think there's something to be said about that, in terms of having to take that amount of time to develop those internal resources within ourselves to know that regardless what happens, we'll still be okay. That we'll be able to, put one foot in front of the other and continue moving forward, even if we don't get the response that we're wanting, and it's a big topic for sure. So I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting. My mom, I remember exactly like where I was for like both conversations, and like my mom, I did it both of them on the phone, but my mom, I was like so upset and like worked up to try and like be brave enough to tell her. She was like, oh my God, do you have cancer? Like, are you dying?
Well, I mean, that does offer oh no, it's not nearly that bad. No.
I'm like, no, part of me let try and let go of the shame of something, like maybe, but like my dad was like, oh, so much more makes sense now. I'm like, you think? But like not all of my family. It's just like just those two out of an entire family group. But if anybody watches this, like then they'll know.
Yes.
But anyway, so like, but that's all part of like the having the conversation. And so on to the aspect of how we manage homophobia and mental health and the physical repercussions of all those things, because we know in general for any subject matter that our mental health can actually create somatic responses within our body. So stomach aches, headaches, heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, panic attacks, like nausea, like all of these things that actually come from mental health. And obviously, like if you're having an emotion as strong as homophobia, right? Like that's going to create a very strong visceral response in your body. So
for certain, yes. Yeah, so this particular study that I shared on the link there in Facebook, there are a number of other researchers who are coming in and expanding upon this research and beginning to actually get like some physiological markers to further assess what potentially is going on here in terms of the expression of homophobia, and how that potentially has an impact on cardiovascular health, especially cardiovascular health. So while I was in a PhD program, a really big thing, within the horse world is polyvagal theory.
Right.
And one of the labs that I was involved with, we did respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is...
Hold on. For the people out there who don't know what polyvagal theory is, like, let's break that down for the people.
So Dr. Stephen Porges, he's one of the guys that basically inspired me to want to go and pursue a PhD, because his research has really just changed how we think about the autonomic nervous system, which is essentially just a lot of the functions of the body that we can think of as just kind of being automatic, like our breathing, our heart rate, and things that we don't necessarily have direct control over. His research was able to really demonstrate, especially for mammals, the capacity of the autonomic nervous system to really have a huge impact and influence our health, especially when we kind of think about like emotional regulation and the ability to co-regulate in relationships, harmoniously. And it continues to be sort of parsed down into looking at sort of this aspect of psychological safety. And so that can look like external safety. It can also, in terms of how we perceive our internal safety. So it's been really quite pivotal in how we understand, how our heart rate, our respiratory rate, have not only how our past and like previous traumas or lack of proper care, so maybe neglect as a child, or potentially even like a pretty traumatic car accident or a surgery, how all that can have an influence on the way our autonomic nervous system functions, and in turn how that can have cascading long-term effects on our health.
Yeah.
So that's a really long-winded way of saying that, like his research has really given us some insight into how to not only identify a little bit better how one's autonomic nervous system is functioning, but it's also given us a really great roadmap about how to help individuals achieve more of a homeostasis in our nervous system so that they can have that balance of rest, digest, being able to relax, and yet have a nervous system that can also get up into high arousal, doing things like fun, having joy, really engaging in or potentially even being able to keep one safe by engaging in the fight, flight, freeze system too. But being able to do so in a regulated way and being able to recover. And if we do get ourselves into a situation where it is high stress, we can come back and de-stress quicker when we have a well-tuned, vagus nerve, essentially. That's what it comes down to. So that's getting into neuroscience. I don't know if that was, maybe the most concise, well thought out breakdown, but I can maybe get them a little bit of an idea.
Yeah. And what they can look up if they have more questions.
Certainly, and I definitely recommend it. There's a lot of great videos out there that can definitely. I'm on the fly here. That was kind of on the whim, so it wasn't maybe the best description, but there's definitely a lot of great videos that can be really good resources if people want to look into that further. So I was mentioning the lab that I was in. We were working with respiratory sinus arrhythmia.
Yeah.
And so in terms of this epidemiological study and how people, who have homophobic attitudes or beliefs and they express those behaviors, what this study found is that in terms of their mortality rates, they lose essentially 2.5 years of
Wow.
their lifespan. And it wasn't too big of a surprise in terms of, like you mentioned, how you think about like just that physiological arousal and being highly charged. And
Yeah.
homophobia in some regards is sort of a sympathetic state within the nervous system where it has a fight, it has a pretty high charge.
Yeah.
And so those beliefs and those feelings, if they're not really given like an avenue, like a way of being channeled and expressed in a way that could be healthy, or so that they could, someone who harbors those feelings, if they're not able to channel those through healthy communications or healthy discussions, the body's left carrying that. It's left with that high charge. And so it does make sense that would have a long-term consequence that could take years off someone's life. So they're beginning to understand a bit more in terms of how those beliefs and those behaviors are potentially doing that. They're beginning to look at the mechanisms a bit more to get a better understanding of what's happening there. But that's not sorted out, and so I don't really have. Unfortunately, on that side of the sword, that's kind of where it stops. But there's certainly enough there in terms of just looking at that one study was really well done. There have been a few that have been able to replicate very similar metrics, and so it is something that's pretty solid. in terms of being a public health issue for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously for, the LGBTQ community, because, in terms of experiencing what's referred to as structural stigma, which is actually, it is a term that was coined by the same lab that did the study that I referred to earlier about the impact that it has on those who harbor homophobia. And that study basically found that it takes 12 years off of our lives in terms of the LGBTQ community, in terms of experiencing high levels of structural stigma. And that's on the structural level. So that's like our government and sort of like how our cities and towns operate on even the smaller governmental level.
Interesting.
And if you think about, so, I'm here in very progressive, rather liberal Washington. So this environment feels far more affable than if I were, say, in Louisiana, parts of Georgia, parts of the South, which I have a lot of familiarity with and have spent, a lot of time in the South. And a lot of that kind of definitely has to do with the lack of resources, because obviously in those areas for the LGBTQ community, they might be less inclined to even receive like medical assistance or medical consult, because just the fear of homophobia by medical staff. And obviously, just the notion of, feeling as though they need to be unseen and unheard when they're out in public, so that they're concealing their identity. That in itself has been found to lead to a lot of pretty detrimental health effects, just having to conceal that. So the study has done a lot to just, really help us recognize that, homophobia and structural stigma, have a pretty detrimental impact on the gay community, but it isn't just us. And so this conversation isn't just about empowering and advocating for the LGBTQ community. It's really wanting to, what I would love to see happen more is really opening it up and having even those who harbor, these negative feelings toward me or in the community that I belong to, from a place of compassion, I just want to let them know that, this really has a huge impact on them. And out of my humanitarian, wants to, just see those who who do harbor these effects or these opinions or these prejudices, to just recognize that they do have a negative impact on them, and this is a decision point. They can engage with this conversation how they see fit, how they feel comfortable. If anything, I just hope that if I can plant a seed, and that even if in this talk, it doesn't land completely with someone. If anything, if they can go out and maybe potentially find someone else who they can talk to, who maybe they have a better relationship with or understanding of, I think it is something that is important, and it is a bit of a public health crisis on both ends. And it would be great just to see how this goes and continue having more dialogue around it, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's a lot of polarization occurring right now on various different platforms, in regards to the pandemic, the protests, the Black Lives Matter, like all these different sorts of things. And so that same sort of like emotional charge that you're talking about with homophobia is occurring in these different subject matters, and how we can see how it affects both parties, right? And so at the end of the day, I think what happens is it's really about how do we come to a place within ourselves with grace and patience to be able to open up a dialogue and be able to talk to people without shame or invalidation, and be like, hey, like, why do you feel the way that you feel? And allowing that space for a person to be okay to express themselves about the way that they feel, even if we don't agree with them. And to understand that that's about their journey. It's not about us, that we can be secure within ourselves and our authentic being, and just be able to have the resiliency, the strength to own that space, and to understand that if people aren't able to meet us on either side of the fence, sometimes it's okay to just say, hey, I don't agree with you, and it's really difficult for me to hold this space when I'm around you. And
Right.
so out of integrity for both parties, you can just choose to not engage with one another rather than be antagonistic. Um, you know, because we all have our journey of self-discovery and where we're going to go. And it's just like you see a comment on Facebook or whatever, you're scrolling through and something, you read it and it charges you up right away.
Right.
Like, if you feel a charge in your body, if you're being honest with yourself, are you capable, are you in a space within yourself to neutrally, logically respond to that with respect and integrity for yourself and the other person, and be able to receive whatever comes back to you in that same space of neutrality rather than feeding the fire?
Yes.
And
That task. Go
if you
ahead.
if you can't, then I feel like having the integrity to be like, okay, I'm not in a space to engage with that person about that, and I can leave. And if I am able to de-escalate and come back and try and have a rational conversation that's respectful, then I can do that. But if you can't, and you're just going to have an antagonistic conversation, like how many times have you had an antagonistic conversation with somebody, or like somebody came at you with that and you're like, oh my gosh, that totally makes sense, and you change when somebody was antagonistic towards you?
Yeah, I don't know that that's really ever happened, but
Right? Right? So like, why do we think that like we want to change someone's perspective, right? Because we're not okay with whatever they're thinking. Yet somehow we think that if we are attacking them, that they're going to change. This isn't war.
right.
You know, like there's always a loser. And like instead, like in war, somebody always loses, rather than being like, okay, if I can have a conversation about two different viewpoints, then I may or may not change my mind. But if I don't change my mind, I at least have clear information to be able to analyze whether or not I'm like what I'm going to do next in that
So,
process.
right. For sure.
And so that's why it's like, how do we create the safe spaces for people that are in a space of feeling homophobic, and helping guide them in a way that like, here's a conversation that like, I'm not going to attack you for what you just said, but why do you feel like that? And is there like, and if they can't say it, just be like, hey, like, well, I'm just not going to continue associating with you if you feel the need to say that to you. And that can be really hard if some of those people are family members, right?
Definitely.
Or
Definitely. Yeah.
friends or coworkers. And like, how do you get the support from your community or your government or whatever to be able to create that container to move through it in a functional way? And I feel like that's what people are really struggling with right now, is to be able to get the support, to get the resiliency, to be able to do those things. Because for so many people out there, their bandwidth is like done. Like,
Right.
it's been a
Yes.
crazy effing year. And a lot of people like, I got nothing left for you in this like insanity that continues to happen. So how do we support one another in community to increase the bandwidth, to increase the safe spaces, so we can actually have just enough to be like, hey, this is what I need from you,
For sure.
and that be okay.
Right. Yeah, that's an incredibly great point. And one of the things that I don't mean to digress too much, but that I've realized this before, but like during this call, one of the things that came up from that's really important, in terms of maybe why I feel like it's so important to me in terms of looking at both sides of the sword, and how uh, I hope in a very regulated way to initiate this conversation, and be able to stay regulated throughout the process of recognizing that that this is an edgy conversation, and I do know what I'm getting myself into, and the reason that I believe I feel comfortable with engaging in it is that I know what it's like to be homophobic. That was definitely something that I internalized very deeply growing up. And so I've had to really kind of sit with and sort through those beliefs and those attitudes within myself. Obviously, it's different because it was very juxtaposed, and the antithesis to accepting who I am, and being able to embrace myself. But I think that's something that um, I think that's why it's important to me, is that I've been down that road, and it's been part of my process, and not everyone is going to follow the same path, and nor should they. But if for those who are ready to potentially start that conversation, you know, I'm here, and I hope that we're able to, you know, just provide a lot of, you know, great information for people to sort through, because it is a messy topic, but it is something that I think has huge benefits for both sides, for
Yeah,
sure. If anything, for our health.
yeah, and Nathan, I so appreciate your courage in coming forward in this conversation, because I mean, like, we talked about it before we hopped online about it, and it's just like, okay, like, are you
Yeah.
are you really ready to have this conversation? Because it is edgy.
Yes. And so earlier I was going to mention, you know, when I was in a PhD program, I was in the lab where we're studying, you know, respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is a metric of polyvagal, within polyvagal theory. One of the studies that we were looking at was essentially stress contagion, and it's the contagion of racism too. So bringing parents in with their children and being able to have them watch a simulation of, you know, it was basically an animation that of children making a racist remark, and being able to in the moment be able to have, you know, a very good idea of what respiratory rate was, what the heart rate was of both parent and child, as the parent went through discussing that with their child in terms of, okay, so what does this mean? How do I explain this to my child? What happened here in this animation? And you know, what the studies have essentially been able to demonstrate is that there is sort of a transmission, an intergenerational transmission of racism that is passed down intergenerationally, you know, from parents or potentially family members to their children.
Yeah.
And that becomes a physiological state that, you know, these children eventually carry into adulthood, and, you know, can, you know, be confronted with by them, you know, they may confront themselves with those attitudes and those beliefs, or, you know, just life will, you know, provide them an opportunity one way or another to sort of sit with, you know, what they inherited as a belief that isn't just, you know, a belief or an attitude, but it has a physiological component. It is a felt sense.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is that, you know, these studies haven't been done around homophobia, but it makes, you know, a lot of sense that there is that intergenerational transmission that is passed down and that can be inherited. So the reason that this is such a big, messy topic is that there's multiple generations of undone, unsaid, unprocessed work around all this, and so it is, you know, getting ready to sit at a big dinner table with a huge amount of, you know, stuff to have to sort through and discuss. So because it is so many generations that it is definitely deeply entrenched into our collective psychology, and yeah, so it's a big topic, but at the same time, just I really hope that you know, if anything, just coming on and the two of us discussing this and having this conversation, hopefully it just inspires others to, you know, dig a little deeper, if not like going into the research and looking, you know, to learn more about the studies, but just going within themselves and getting a better sense of, you know, where those attitudes and beliefs may have stemmed from. And whether those are, you know, beliefs that they want to continue having, you know, sort of hijack their nervous system and their bodies, and potentially having, you know, significant health effects, negative health effects because of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's so much more going on in the LGBTQ plus community now too, with like all the different genders that are coming forward, and like quantifiers and trans and so on and so forth, and the judgment that's going on within that community.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I feel like people don't talk about that as much either. And maybe I mean, I don't know if you can speak to that. I haven't gotten to have that conversation that much, other just than a handful of people, and them being like, especially with like me being bisexual, it's just like, well, some gay people are like, well, choose. And I'm like, I can't. Like, it wasn't ever a choice for me. Like, it's just like, I had a spark with a girl when I was 13, and I've always been attracted to boys. Like, I've had sparks with both. Like, I don't have a conversation with my body and be like, so body, we really need to decide, like, what are we doing here? Like, that's not the way that works. I mean, I know there are some people out there that are just like, hey, I just want to explore, and it's fun, and it's like relax, like whatever, they're going through a phase. Because I mean, that happens. Like, you're teenagers, you're pushing the envelope, trying to figure out who you are in life. Like,
Certainly.
it's not a big deal, but for some of us, it was never a choice. It's just what is.
Yes.
You know, and so just having that conversation too, like, judgment wise.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of like self-disclosure, you know, I dealt with a lot of my own internalized homophobia as, you know, I became an adult and went off to school. And, you know, that was certainly one process, but, you know, another process was identifying and being confronted with and learning to sort through my transphobia. Because, you know, I can remember beginning to accept myself as a gay man, but then also being like, well, I don't understand that whole trans thing.
Right.
And it was just easy to kind of be dismissive and be like, I have enough of my own stuff I'm trying to sort out and figure out here. Like, you want me to, like, understand what's going on with something that I don't necessarily, you know, experience. But go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. And as being 41, like, I'm in a different generation too. I'm just like, there's the trans thing, and then I'm like, there's this gender fluid and like Z and X, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can't even manage all of them. And then having the conversations, and some people being very sensitive about what you're calling them with their gender and the pronouns and whatnot. And I just want to be like, listen, I'm doing the best I can. I have to build a whole new habit life. Like, please, like, understand my intention is not to be oppressive, and like have a little grace. Like, I'm trying to give you grace and everything. Like, please, like, give me the same grace while I build this. And I have a hard enough time remembering people's names. Like, honestly, like, you want me to remember a gender pronoun too on top of that? Like, come on.
Yes.
And I mean, like, I'm joking, but I'm also being serious. Like, I do struggle with people's names. I remember their faces, but then I'm just like, this is a whole nother layer that I have to.
Well, and you know, and it goes back to a little bit what I spoke to earlier about, you know, my family and their process of coming out, and how I had to really approach that with a sense of compassion for them. You know, self-compassion, obviously, you know, recognize how that had an impact on me and how it didn't always feel good. But in addition to that, being able to recognize that it didn't feel good for them either. Like, they're really trying, and they're putting in effort, and it doesn't necessarily look the way that I would hope, but the fact is, you know, they're putting in the effort. So I have to recognize that. And I think that the same goes to, you know, being gender fluid, that, you know, and the pronouns, that I have definitely been someone who's messed up multiple times, and you just have to say, you know, I'm terribly sorry. I am trying. I really want to make this work. I want you to know that I really value you, and I want to make sure that you feel heard, you feel seen in the way that you know, wish to be seen and heard.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot. And if anything, you know, in terms of anyone out there who also identifies in the community, is just, you know, if there's anything I can offer, you know, our community, is just to, you know, to recognize that there are a lot of people who are really trying and really doing our best to, you know, just give them as much patience as you possibly can, and a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy, because we didn't have a choice. You know, we didn't have a choice in who we are. We didn't have a choice to come out if it meant just being who we are, and not living, you know, in the closet. And they don't really have a whole lot of choice in terms of, they can't change that they're a family member, or extended family member, etc. But you know, for them, you know, they can a little bit more easily walk away and just sort of, you know, put their head in the sand. But if they're choosing not to, yeah, just like you said, giving them as much grace as possible, because we need them. We need our allies. We need our advocates. And they need to come in all shapes, sizes, forms, mentalities, you know, whatever, from wherever. And you know, just doing our best to just boost them up, because, you know, obviously that's what we need for ourselves. We do need to boost each other up and do our best to boost up our allies and our advocates, because yeah, and then to what you had said, the bisexual community does oftentimes feel isolated within the queer sexual minority community, and it is sort of this between a rock and a hard place, because, well, not gay but not straight, and a lot of times those not living necessarily within that I don't know, that dichotomy, it's difficult. You're in the paradox, and
Yeah. And there's a spectrum there too of like how much you swing in either direction in being bi, like, is it really like 50-50? Or are you more geared towards one or the other? Like, there's so much to it.
Yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, it'd be great if things were a bit more concrete and black and white, because that would give us a bit more of a construct to work with. But sexuality is so fluid and it's so gray that there's always just going to be a lot of unknown. And I think, especially on this topic, the sooner we're willing to accept that we're not going to understand everyone's sexual life and psychologically and obviously physically, but and that's okay. And
yeah, there was another aspect that we'd spoken about, which I think is really important, because even being straight and as a man, like, for men to, like, your G-spot is in your prostate. So, like, to have, like, anything anally, like a finger or a dildo or a penis or whatever, like, to be able to say, oh, if I'm just engaging with my female partner potentially and trying to just appreciate my entire body and explore all the pleasure zones of that, and men sometimes feeling like, oh, if I have anything anally, like, does that make me gay? Right?
right.
And instead of just being okay with, no, like, it's my body, I'm only attracted to women, but I do love and appreciate every aspect of my body and the pleasure that can be given there.
Right. Yes.
And also the nurturing aspect of men being physical with one another. And, like, you have different cultures. Like, in Italy, men kiss each other on the lips and are super masculine and straight.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
And they're very, like, gregarious and touchy-feely, and it's not a big deal. But in America, that is, like, no-go most
Right.
of the time, and so having those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been a number of articles put out there around touch deprivation in straight men, because just the fear of being thought of, or just the mere thought of being identified as a gay person by, falsely identified as a gay person by someone else. That fear is so great that just the idea of touching someone is something that they're just highly reserved around. So yeah, so that's another aspect where homophobia can definitely have an impact, because we know touch is so incredibly important. And I know you had just done a really great talk on the differences in touch, and
Nurturing versus sexual touch, like, it's a big deal.
It really is, and just the impact that has on our neurochemistry, and how it can help the body re-regulate and release the good stress hormones that help us recover from stress. And so much of the way we are wired neurobiologically is to really thrive in relationships and thrive through intimacy and touch. And it doesn't have to be sexual, like you said. There's a lot of great intimacy that I think a lot of straight men, or potentially even a lot of gay men too, who still have a lot of internalized homophobia, who are missing out on by feeling as though they can't engage in just casual touch, the touch of the shoulder, touch of the back, a hug. These are all just really practical things that like you said, some cultures have zero problem with, and yet here we definitely seem to see a lot more men who are just a lot more ambivalent around physical touch, especially with other men.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, like, with so many people having porn addiction and struggling with those aspects, right? That there's a lot of seduction that's lost just naturally in exploring the body through touch. through foreplay and all those different things, and people just wanting to get straight to things. And then you have Tinder and Bumble and like all these sorts of things. Tinder obviously like being on the like other end of that, and like places that you can just hook up that are specifically for like very clearly specifically for sex. And
Right.
and I think some of that lack of foreplay comes from a lack of communication, a lack of ability to have healthy boundaries, a lack of interest and understanding of their own physical being. Because like how many people actually just caress their own body, like literally just like lay down, like men or women for that matter, like not just your private areas, but
Right.
like your entire body, like your hands, like your neck, your abdomen, like your legs, the whole thing, your head, and just all of those things to engage your body, right? The sensory perception and re-engage, because so many people disconnect. Like you're in pain, you're distracted, you don't have time, you have like body issues, you're like, oh, I'm too fat, oh, I'm too skinny, like I don't want to like touch my body and feel those sensations. I have wrinkles, I have, like I had kids, I can feel like whatever your considerations
Right.
are about your body, like you don't want to confront that in it, instead of loving the temple that you're in, right? And then that feeds into
Exactly.
their relationships. It's just like, if you don't feel good touching your own body, you're probably going to have some sort of condition, like consideration of somebody else touching your body, somebody else being sexually, physically interested in your body. Like there's this just giant disconnection there, single or in relationships,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know?
And you know, not seeing the body as just some sort of like piece of armor that, you know, we need to like, you know, be hyper masculine and be, you know, this sort of this, you know, tough guy, which by all means, that's, I don't mean to make a judgment, that that's great, that, you know,
There's a
if
time
people
and place for
really
all things, my
interested.
friend.
I'm sorry.
There's a time and place for all things.
Oh, certainly, certainly. Um, but I,
I
well,
apologize for interrupting. You were
no,
talking about the armor that men have.
uh, yeah, just in terms of, uh, you know, I think in many ways we are taught to, you know, not show our emotions and not, uh, you know, really be in touch with our bodies and
Right.
really see our bodies more of just sort of this vehicle that gets us around,
Yeah.
and that we can abuse it. You know, we just like we can extend beyond, like well beyond what we should be doing for our oil change in our car. We can kind of use our
No, we
body.
never do that. I never
No.
go past that. Definitely not.
But you know, I think, you know, we can definitely sort of get in this mindset that be really disconnected from our bodies.
For sure.
And for sure, like this, our bodies really, the more in touch we are, the more we're able to self-soothe ourselves and self-regulate, you know, through touch.
Absolutely.
The greater our capacity to be able to co-regulate with touch with someone else. You know, so that, yeah, definitely makes an enormous amount of sense. And I don't know, like that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure I've thought about that, you know, somewhere down the line. But you framed it in a way that I really really like, and um, yeah, I'm sure you're already doing something around more with that, with, you know, introducing the concepts of touch to men, because that's huge. I think that will, you know, benefit and be a huge, you know, lifesaver for a lot of men out there who, uh, you know, really could do a lot to, you know, get more in touch with their bodies. You know, not just in touch with their psychology, but which, you know, as someone who's trained somatically, I would say that the body and psychology sort of are intertwined. Um,
For sure.
and as we improve the relationship we have with our bodies, a lot of times our psychology can improve as well.
Absolutely. It's a great way to increase your bandwidth. Like if you're really struggling in the day, just in general, if you're by yourself, to engage and just like be super like just gentle, just tenderly like touching your body. And that alone like just produces different endorphins and like happy feelings in your body to give yourself the bandwidth to regulate, to calm down, to reassess, and to make those logic-based decisions. And it sounds kind of interesting to be like, oh, I need to touch myself to have more logic, and not just like the different fun, not just the different fun areas that gives you different happy feelings. And I feel like that's actually typically more distracting, and like it's really good stress relief in some ways, and I'm definitely a proponent for self-pleasure, but in the other ways of just like calming down and like focusing on your breath, like integrating your body. And to be frank, like your orgasms will be way better for men or for women the more connected you are to your body.
Definitely, yes. So one thing that we haven't mentioned with your audience, I have trained with the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute, and like, oh my goodness, like so that was about a 2-year process, and like I don't want to get like too TMI, but
we don't have that here.
I would definitely say, obviously just the relationship I had with my body just dramatically shifted. And I went from being the person that would lay in bed for like 2.5 hours waiting to fall asleep to suddenly waking up or realizing one day, oh my gosh, like I go to bed and I fall asleep in 5 minutes. Like, when did that happen?
Yeah, for people dealing with insomnia.
Yeah, and a lot of just being able to help with getting in the body and regulating that definitely helps with just being able to develop a healthier sleeping pattern for sure, and among many other things. And I would definitely say that in terms of just like my sensory experience and just being able to really be present with my body and enjoy my body with someone else, and all of that enhanced dramatically by body practices. And just becoming much more, integrated within myself for sure.
No, that's really beautiful. And, and for people out there that really enjoy weightlifting, but also struggle with insomnia, I tell a lot of my massage clients, I do medical massage, and I have them when they lay down, like I tell them, like, this is your homework. So they go home and they work on relaxing their toes, and then like each individual muscle in their feet and then up their legs, and just like really focusing on the individual like muscles. And how that transfers to working out is that oftentimes we actually overlift like the amount of weight that we put on, and then we're recruiting other muscles in the body, and then you're creating potential like weaknesses in other spots because you're not strengthening what you need to for that particular area. Yes. And then if you're able to isolate the different muscles, then you're actually able to train your muscles properly to build. And especially if you're trying to do any sort of competitive like bodybuilding or whatnot, and you're wanting that definition, you want to be able to isolate those muscles when you're lifting, right? Okay. And the flip side is they're actually healthier when you're able to contract and relax each area at will, which not a lot of people actually can do. But when I had my back surgeries, I noticed, because like I was told to do that, and it was remarkable how much less weight I could actually lift. It was like a 20 to 40 pound swing of how much how much less I could actually lift when I wasn't recruiting the other muscles and was actually isolating what I was supposed to.
Well, and that's just, I mean, it really speaks to the benefits of like mindfulness being integrated into exercise programs. And
right. And then you'll be less likely to injure your body because you're not recruiting things that are like, and it's too weak, right?
And you're listening to, so to speak, the tensegrity of your body. So like how your body holds tension, and where I guess trying to create more fluid movement within the body's own way of creating or holding tension in a healthy way that helps us with our structure and stability.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you're recruiting muscles, oftentimes those muscles that you're recruiting also include your pelvic floor muscles, which do not get as much work as they should in regards to loosening, which is why pelvic floor physical therapy is so important in going to somebody that has like a PhD in physical therapy and has like visceral manipulation, because they're doing internal work vaginally and anally if you're a woman, and as a man doing it anally or around the scrotum or the penis, because you have all that fascia and muscle, and those muscles get engaged. And then like if you have too much tightness in your pelvic floor as a man, it can affect like erectile dysfunction, like pain with ejaculation, pain with peeing, like so many different things. It can create low back pain if you're having pelvic floor pain. And so like just like really understanding how the full body works. And so if you want to get the most out of your body, like being body aware in that sensory perception is incredibly important for your physical health, because then if your body is hurting you, that also affects you psychologically. It makes it harder for you to sleep, and it makes it harder for you to show up at work and give 100%. It makes it harder for you to interact with your kids and your partners and your friends, because at some level you are going to be distracted, like
Yes.
consciously or subconsciously, if you're not actually taking care of your body. And you're going to have considerations.
Oh, for sure.
Even
Yes.
if they're not at the forefront, it's like how you feel, how you're moving, like in your gait, and how, like, can you pick up your kid? It's like, no, you have weakness. You're like, that really hurts, or like whatever, you know, there's
For
so
sure.
many pieces.
Yes. So yeah, this is like this could be a 5-hour conversation.
I know, honestly. I think we've been going for an hour, a little over an hour already. So I mean, like, just so easy, because it's all about physical and mental health, right? And how the charge occurs in our bodies, and the synapses in our brain, because of different sensory perceptions, like, and how we react to our external environment, and the ability to control our own minds, because that's where power really comes from, is the ability to decide if we're going to be out effect of our external environment. Because if you're not, you're disempowering yourself and you're handing your power over to somebody else.
For sure. Yes.
And no one really wants that, right? But how do you get the support from counselors, from life coaches, relationship coaches, personal trainers, physical therapists, like whoever, to increase that awareness and give you the support you need, so you can have the resiliency and mind strength, not just
Yes.
physical strength, to be able to create those spaces of neutrality and respect and integrity.
Remarkably well said. I couldn't have said it better myself. So
Thank you. And on that note, is there anything else you would like to bring to the table, Nathan? Like how, like another subject matter, or how people can find you if they would like support from you?
Yeah, so my name's Nathan P. Lee. I am on Facebook. I think I might even be like tagged in the post. So that's definitely one way. So I mostly I'm developing a practice working with equestrians. So I recently became licensed in the state of Washington. So I will begin like a mental health program that I'm going to be working out of Olympia with a really awesome organization called Healing Hearts Ranch.
It's a great place. I know them. I can vouch. They're fantastic.
I mean, it's a remarkable facility. They're doing such an incredible job. And, you know, I've been to a lot of different horse facilities that offer these types of services. And what I really recognize is that these horses are engaged in the work. Like these horses, they're not checked out, and they're really just fully present and really well taken care of. So I'm really incredibly happy to be at such a great facility. But with that said, I do have a website called Sound Hearted Equitation.
Nice.
And it's actually linked into my bio on my Facebook. So, you know, if people are wanting to, you know, reach out and learn more about, you know, sort of structural stigma and sort of the double-edged sword of discrimination and homophobia, definitely happy to provide more resources or just, you know, have a chat. And obviously, if there's any questions out there who would like to learn more about the work that I provide, like a very somatically based sports psychology approach to working with our horses. I you know, would definitely enjoy working with a wide variety of different people in that regard as well. So
fantastic. I love it.
We'll meet again too to you know, talk a bit more about the horse piece, because
that's right.
That's what got us connected. But I definitely wanted to jump in on the men's group as well. So.
No, I so appreciate your time and getting to be here today. And I look forward to getting to interview you about the horse piece. And anybody that's out there, if you think that you want to connect with me for the relationship coaching, mindset, and helping with confidence and the different things that you're struggling with out there, you can find me on my Facebook page or through Global Equine Affiliates to discover, book a discovery call. And just find the person that like you really resonate with, be it Nathan or me or some other fantastic coach. We both know lots of them. So if you're looking for something just a little bit different, still feel free to like reach out to us. We're happy to refer, because there's more than enough people out there for all of us to serve, you know?
Certainly, most definitely.
We can't do it all by ourselves.
No, not at all.
So everyone, thank you so much for watching. Nathan, so much for being here today. I appreciate you and everything you're doing to make the world a better place, both for people and for horses.
Well, likewise, I'm so glad that we've connected. You're definitely a shining light, and I've just been very inspired by you, and very impressed with the work that you're doing to make the world a better place. So right back at you.
Thank you, Nathan.
Certainly.
All right, everybody. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.